This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence. Hello friends! In today's video, I am going to be recreating an older watercolor painting for the third time that was originally inspired by the unicorns from when I went to see the Nutcracker Ballet many years ago. The original illustration I did back in 2015 using, I think, my cheap Reeves watercolors, some fine liners, and craft glitter. And then in 2018, I recreated it using watercolors, acrylic ink, and some glitter stars. I don't remember which watercolors, unfortunately, but it was definitely something upgraded from the Reeves set. And when I look at these two pieces, there are definitely elements that I like about both of them. And I actually really still like the 2018 version a lot, and there isn't much about it that I would want to change. But something that I wanted to bring back for the newest one was the unicorn ears that I had left out. And I also just thought it would be interesting to see if there would be any noticeable differences in my style or painting approach in my newest version. And so I also didn't want it to be exactly the same as the previous two, so I decided I would add a moon into the composition this time around, which I think creates some more visual interest. And so to start, like many of my pieces, I did the sketch digitally on my iPad using Procreate. I debated on giving her some hair clips and barrettes, but ultimately ended up going with some pearls scattered throughout her hair instead. Because while I love adding hair clips as accessories to my portraits, I felt like the pearls suited the fantasy vibe of this piece a lot better. And then when I was happy with the sketch, I printed it out and used my light pad to transfer it onto some watercolor paper. And before we continue on with the painting, I just wanted to quickly talk about today's sponsor. The past couple of months, I have been working on a brand new website on Squarespace that will allow me to have everything in one place, a beautiful portfolio, about me page, and my online shop. I have a lot of different products that I need to list in my shop, which can feel pretty daunting, but something that I love about Squarespace is that I can edit my product photos directly onto their platform, which definitely helps streamline the process. So if you're interested in launching your own website, head over to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/imawonder for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Okay, so now moving on to the painting process of the newest version of this unicorn. All of the products used in this video will be listed in the description. So to start, I decided I would use some masking fluid for the pearls in her hair and for the moon. If you're not familiar, masking fluid is something that will resist water and paint, so that way you can have areas untouched without having to meticulously paint around them. So when you peel it off, it reveals the paper underneath. I had done a little test glob of masking fluid on the side there, and since I didn't want it to go to waste, I used the end of my paintbrush to use it up on some areas of her face, and I wanted to use it as well to kind of move the masking fluid around on the moon as well. And then when the masking fluid dried, I went ahead and prepared some of my watercolor paints on the palette, adding a lot of water to these mixtures so that it would be really light and translucent. So when I start, I usually use a clean wet paintbrush to dampen the entire background area so that I can achieve really soft, diffuse washes of color. I alternated between violet and blue paint to give it some variances, and I avoided having too much color concentrated on the birch trees that would be closest to the viewer. That way we can have a little bit of depth in the background. Then, while the background dried, I moved on to painting the first layer of her skin. I had pre-mixed two different colors that I would alternate between to give some of the areas on her skin more warmth than others. I like using this technique because I find that when you lay two different colors next to each other while they're still wet, they blend into each other more seamlessly. Another thing that I ended up changing about this version from the previous two was that I decided to give her different clothing. The previous two, I had been doing these like jewels and pearl details on her sleeve/shoulders, but since I basically included that in her hair, I thought that it might be good to change it up for her clothing this time around. I came across a couple of different dresses on Pinterest that had these ribbons that tied up as the straps on the dress or the top, which I thought was really pretty and delicate. So I thought that it would really suit this illustration since the kind of entire vibe of this unicorn is very ethereal and kind of light in terms of its feeling. And so I thought that also having the little ribbon strands sort of blowing in the wind also gives this piece a little bit of movement and that kind of whimsical vibe as well. And similar to how I did the background, I wet the entire area on her hair with a clean wet brush and then added the paint alternating between violet and blue paint mixtures to give it a very soft, diffused wash. And something that I originally set out to do with this piece but ended up failing at was that I really liked how in the first version of this unicorn, her skin was quite cool toned, which I felt like reinforced that she was otherworldly or not quite human because the skin tone was just so cool and pale. But to be honest, I was really not in the mood to be painting this week, and I also felt really rushed to get this piece finished so that I could have the video ready for my weekly YouTube video. And so I think that I just wasn't really thinking because I was like painting in panic, and I ended up doing one too many layers on her skin, which resulted in a much warmer and richer complexion than I had intended for. This is, of course, not necessarily a bad thing, but I think it was worth mentioning that there are so many times when you set out for one thing and it ends up being another. I often get questions asking about why I chose to paint a certain way or why I made certain decisions, and honestly, most of the time I don't have a perfect explanation for it. A lot of my painting process is intuitive as well as trial and error. There are so many times when I approach a painting with something in mind, and through the course of the process, either I change my mind or it just ends up differently. And this is something that I have been trying to embrace, basically just trying to let go of this obsession of control, because I think that creating art should be allowed to be an organic process and obviously in turn results in varied outcomes. Throughout the process of creating this piece, I kept stressing out about the fact that this new version may turn out worse than the previous one. If you've ever done this Draw This Again challenge or seen other artists do it, you might have experienced or seen that there's always going to be a percentage of people who say that they preferred the older version. And that can be pretty deflating because personally, it makes me feel as though I have regressed as an artist and that all of my years of hard work have not paid off at all. Of course, this is typically not what the intention is behind these comments because, of course, art is subjective, but I can't help but feel that way when I read those types of comments. With the 2015 to 2018 version of this illustration, I was in a place where I felt pretty confident that I was going to be able to adequately showcase my growth And when I finished that 2018 version, I was really proud of the development between the two. I felt like it gave me a confidence boost and had reassured me that I had come a long way as an artist. Now, 3 years later and approaching the painting again, like I mentioned earlier, I still really liked that painting, and because this was going to be the third time I recreated it, I really felt the pressure to deliver something significantly better, even though I really didn't have a problem with the previous version in the first place. But something that I think is important to remember is that everyone has their ups and downs through their art journey, regardless of how much experience is under their belt. And as I mentioned in some of my recent videos, I have been dissatisfied with my art style, but I also don't have a clear vision of where I want to take it necessarily. So I think that the biggest difference with the 2018 version and this newer version is that I think with the previous one, I had a clearer vision in mind for the piece, and I think I was a little bit more comfortable or pleased with where my art was at the time. Whereas with this newest version, I feel like I'm not really sure where I'm going. And I was also in a place where I was really trying to rush through the process because I wanted to finish it in time so that I could edit this video and get it out for a certain deadline. Whereas with the 2018 version, I had all the time in the world and I didn't have the same social media presence that I do now. And so there was, I think, less pressure in general on that previous one. And I think that these pressures of social media and content creation can be pretty stifling as an artist. And I think that I'm really feeling the repercussions of that lately. I obviously don't really have a solution to any of this, because obviously this is the career that I have chosen to take. And while I absolutely do not regret it, and I'm very thankful to be able to, do what I love for a living, I have to realize that it's not always going to be sunshines and rainbows because I think that creating artwork can be an emotional experience. I think that it requires a lot of love and care to spend all this time making an art piece. And when you feel like you're being rushed, or you feel like you have all these eyes on you, so you are worried about failure, it really changes the dynamic of the creation process and how you feel about the piece in the end. Like, even doing this voiceover, watching the footage back and having, seen and looked at this finished piece for a couple of days now, I'm still so torn on it. I don't really know how I feel about it. And I look back at that 2018 one and I'm like, this is great. I love it. So it's very bizarre. I don't really know. Maybe in a week or two, I will be able to feel differently about this new version, but I don't know what it is. I can't really explain why I'm feeling this way about this new version. And the reason why I'm choosing to share all of these inner thoughts with you is because I want you to know that everyone struggles with their confidence in their work. I think that it's safe to say that every artist is going to experience a lack of motivation through their art journey, regardless of how long they've been doing it. And this is why I always stress to young and or aspiring artists that you have to be patient and you really got to put in the work. These feelings of self-doubt can be incredibly discouraging, but that's why we have to remind ourselves of why we choose to make art in the first place. If you're coming from a place of wanting to only gain popularity and success, I think that you'll lose your drive pretty quickly. But if you really love creating artwork, I think that you're more likely to stick it out through all the good and the bad because you're passionate about what you do. You may not feel passionate about it all the time, but the love and dedication will still be there. I don't really have much else to say about this process. or this piece. So I'm going to play some music for you guys for the rest of the process, and I'll come back at the end to give my final thoughts on the comparison of all three pieces. And that wraps up the process of this unicorn painting. Honestly, looking at them all lined up, there are things that I can appreciate about all three of them for different reasons. And while I may have really mixed feelings about the 2021 version, I'm still glad I did it because I think that it does serve as an interesting exercise to see how your style has changed and developed as an artist. And I definitely recommend that you do it too, especially if you pick something that's really, really old, because I think that is the best way of seeing how far you've come as an artist. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!